Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Javier Terán. I'm the Data Partnerships Team Lead at the Center for Humanitarian Data, and I welcome you to our new Data Deep Dive series. We are going to be recording the session, so please let me know if you have any concerns about it. I'm going to give one more minute. I see people are pinging me that they have issues to connect to the audio. I'm receiving quite some. Okay, I see them. They managed to connect. Okay, so welcome to our inaugural session of our new Data Deep Dive series. My name is Javier Terán. I work at the Center for Humanitarian Data. You probably heard about the Center for Humanitarian Data, but in case you haven't, the mission of the center is to increase the use and impact of data in humanitarian response. The center mission is that, so since this is our mission, the purpose of our new Data Deep Dive series is to offer you comprehensive understanding of the data that you can find on HDX by bringing to you subject matter experts that can explain to you how about the data that is posted on HDX, but also how you can extract it from the platform. Today, we will have our first deep dive session on the integrated food security phase classification and the corresponding datasets on HDX. At the end of the session, we hope that you will have a better understanding of the IPC methodology, that you improve or enhance your knowledge of the IPC datasets posted on HDX, and that you learn how to represent IPC data on maps and charts. As you probably know, HDX is an open platform for sharing data across crises and organizations. Launched by OCHA in July 2014, the goal of HDX is to make data easy to find and use for analysis. Today, the data sets on HDX cover every active humanitarian crisis from Afghanistan to Yemen. There are about 281 organizations sharing data on HDX. So you find data sets all the way from ACLED, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, all the way to WHO, the World Health Organization. There are about 20,000 data sets that are available for you to view and download. We are currently using IPC on our new COVID-19 Map Explorer that, in case you haven't seen it, you can find it by going to the HDX portal page and clicking on the quick links, which is located on the top right corner of our homepage. The Map Explorer is a platform that brings together more than 20 different data sources to help decision makers prioritize resources in a time of unprecedented need. So the Map Explorer brings together data about COVID cases and deaths. Also, you can find the number of people in need in HRP countries. You can have also access and severity information. You can also find information about the Oxford Stringency Index. You have information from the World Food Program about food market prices. And as well, you have vaccinations campaign status and also humanitarian funding information. So in case you haven't seen it, I really invite you to visit and explore it. It's really a very beautiful platform. I want to introduce our speakers. We'll be starting with Sophie Chotat, who is the IPC Deputy Global Manager. Then we will follow by Godfrey Takabarasha, who's going to give you an overview of the HDX datasets that you find. We have, as following Godfrey, Barbara Fraturolo, who is the IPC Quality Assurance Team Leader. Then we're going to continue with Frank Nikairu, who is the IPC Communications Team Leader. And then we have Laura Bain, who is the IPC Communications Specialist. We will close our webinar with a session of questions and answers that will be facilitated by Karim El Bayar. And for what we hope you will be using the chat box located on the platform. to answer all the questions that you pose here. But in case we run out of time and we cannot answer all your questions, we'll make sure that you will get a response by email. We have your information as you register for this webinar. Have a great webinar and enjoy yourself. Sophie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Javier. Can everybody hear me? Yes, good. Excellent. Before getting into the IPC, I just want to say a big thank you to the HDX team. First, for all their efforts in putting all this IPC data together on the HDX platform. That was a commendable effort, which took quite a bit of time, but it was worth it, as we will see today, and then for organizing and hosting this event. As you probably know, IPC is all about providing information to inform decision-making, and by communicating IPC findings and making them widely accessible, this is basically how we can contribute to this objective. So I'll give you a quick introduction to the IPC, and then in the subsequent sessions, my colleagues from the IPC Global Support Unit will go into the specifics. I'll see my screen. All good? All right. All right, so what is the IPC? It's a common global scale that we use, like countries use, to classify food insecurity and malnutrition. You may know that we actually have 3 IPC scales. One focuses on acute food insecurity. We have one on acute nutrition and another one on chronic food insecurity. So we'll give an overview and talk about the IPC in general, but we'll have a particular focus today on the acute food insecurity scale, which is the one that's most widely used, but above all, because that's the one that we have available in terms of data sets on the HDX at the moment. And then progressively, we hope to expand to the other scales. So the IPC, to inform decision-making, answers 6 questions. First, how many people are food insecure or malnourished? So give a sense of the magnitude. Second, how severe is the situation? The third is why? What are the key drivers? What are the key elements that are driving food insecurity and malnutrition? The fourth one is on where. Where is this happening? In which parts of the country, which parts of the globe? When, because we also give a time element to our analysis with the analysis of the current situation and then the projected situation, the next few months, we give an indication of time. And then we always try to answer the who. So what are the characteristics of the households that are most affected by food insecurity or malnutrition, whether it relates to the type of settlements they're in, IDP, or their livelihood, or other characteristics. The big value added of the IPC is because it's standard protocols, it's comparable. And so it allows stakeholders to compare finding over time and across time and to look at trends. And Barbara will go into the specifics of how we can look at trends in food insecurity and malnutrition. And then it allows us to look at comparability across space. For some reason, I'm missing, I don't know if you can see it, the last bit of the presentation on space. Technical issue, sorry about this. But basically, we can compare the situation within a country, between areas, districts, regions, etc., but also across countries because it's a global scale. Yeah, so from a global or regional perspective, it becomes very handy to look at the situation across countries or across regions. There you go. So how does the IPC inform decision? In many ways, but here are a few key examples where the IPC findings become handy in informing decisions. First, with the current situation, I talked about the severity earlier. in various parts of the country or various parts of the globe, and that can help in making decisions in prioritization of various countries, various areas within the countries. So geographic prioritization. We also provide information on what we expect to happen in the future, typically in the next 6 to 12 months. That can inform decisions on early action or anticipatory action. As you know, there is growing evidence and momentum on the effectiveness of acting early and preventing food crisis from becoming worse. So this is a key element for us and something we've been increasingly working on, feeding to early action. And then because we provide estimates of population in different phases of severity at the moment and for the future, obviously we can provide information on caseload and what we call population in need, and that can inform planning. So this is just a few examples of how IPC findings feed into major products, deliverables, publications that can be used for advocacy, for resource mobilization, for planning purposes, to develop programs, make decisions on programs, and even policies. One of the key examples, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is how IPC is used when it's used in a country and when there is an analysis available to feed into the HNO. So the food security cluster uses the IPC findings to come up with the PIN, the food security sector PIN in the HAO, the nutrition sector as well, and then that feeds into the what we call now the intersectoral PIN. Barbara, I won't go into the details of that. Barbara will give you more specifics on that particular aspect. So how does the IPC work? To conduct IPC analysis, you follow 13 protocols, what we call tools and procedures. So to have the IPC stamp, you follow this particular process, 13 protocols which are organized around 4 key functions of the IPC. The first one is the multi-partner technical consensus. That's what makes IPC, one of the things that make IPC unique is the multi-partner consensus. And that's basically what also takes the most time in conducting an IPC analysis, is bringing all the partners together and having those technical debates. Again, Barbara will get into the details on how that's done. The second function is really the core of what we do, what countries do. It's the analysis, yeah? So we classify severity, magnitude, and we identify the key characteristics of acute food insecurity, chronic food insecurity, or acute malnutrition. And so this is where we come up with the severity map with the population tables, where we have estimates of populations in different IPC phases. And then, as I said before, there's no point in doing very variable analysis if we don't communicate it appropriately. So the third function is around communication. And then we have a quality assurance function, which I'll talk a little bit about later, which is basically a way for us to ensure that the 13 protocols are followed, the functions are adhered to, and we have a good quality IPC product. So how does the IPC process work? This is all country-led and country-owned. At a minimum, it takes about a month to get all the pieces together. This often takes a bit longer because, as you know or can imagine, getting so many partners together can take time, and IPC also deals with a lot of data. There is a planning stage where, on a yearly by yearly basis, stakeholders at the country level get together, they plan the analysis, they find the right timing depending on what the decision makers, when the decision makers need information, depending on seasonality, make sure there is appropriate training conducted prior to the analysis and that all the relevant partners can take part. The preparation is also very important. That happens in the few weeks before the analysis, and this is around the logistics, obviously, but this is also a lot about gathering the data. IPC doesn't collect data, it relies on data that's available from a variety of partners, from assessments, from surveys, remote sensing, etc. So gathering all the latest data available, putting it into the right format to make it digestible for the IPC analysis is an exercise that's very important, and that takes a few days or a couple of weeks. And then the core of what the countries do is the analysis. 2 more minutes. Thank you, Karim. Analysis is typically a workshop. It's on average 5 days. It can take a bit less, a bit more time, depending on how many areas are being analyzed. And this is really the core of the process. It used to happen face-to-face. We are increasingly working on a virtual mode because of COVID, and that's working well. But this is where the analysts from the different organizations get together, conduct the analysis, following the protocol, using our online platform to conduct the analysis and have those important technical debates to reach consensus on the classification. And then right after that, there is the phase of developing the report, which will be then disseminated widely country and global level. And then we always try to encourage learning. So countries typically have a learning and feedback session where they reflect on the analysis that they've just conducted and talk about what can be improved for the next cycle. So why do we say IPC is a global standard? I talked about the standard protocols, the 13 protocols, which are applied across countries. But what's really behind the IPC is a very strong partnership. And with that comes ownership. So the partnership takes different shapes depending on the level that we're referring to. At the global level, we've got 15 organizations that are officially part of the global IPC initiative. You can see the logos on the slides. This includes agencies, NGOs, technical agencies, intergovernmental agencies, clusters, etc. And through quite a strong governance structure, they are represented in a steering committee that gives the strategic direction of the IPC. And then within the IPC Global Support Unit, which I belong to, so are my colleagues who will present later, we basically implement the strategy. So we are the operational arm. And then we've got a global technical advisory group representing those organizations and providing technical expertise and advice on all the normative work that we do. And then you've got the country and the regional level layers. And this is where, again, the core of the work is taking place. While you have 15 partners at global level, at country level, you can have many more or fewer and different ones. So it's all about getting together all the relevant stakeholders in the area of food security and nutrition in the country. Obviously, governments usually have a very strong role and a lead role, but you've got a variety of UN agencies, local NGOs, national NGOs, international NGOs, and other agencies taking part in the process. And then often you've got this mirrored at a regional level with the regional level offices that also can support country level activities and provide guidance. I talked about quality assurance as well. This is a big chunk of the work that we do in the Global Support Unit, where we develop training material, build the capacity of the country teams, regional teams, global colleagues from partners, provide real-time technical support and facilitation of the analysis, and we put in place and implement other quality assurance mechanisms. Just to finish, giving you an overview of where we are in the world. So we have IPCs used in about 30 countries at the moment, with different combinations of the 3 scales. Wide use of the acute food insecurity scale, but increasing use as well of the acute malnutrition scale and the chronic. And then on the West Africa side, and Sahel, you can see that we have the Analyses, that's basically similar protocols and tools used by our which provide comparable analysis and with whom we collaborate very closely. That's all from my side. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sophie. That was very, very interesting. Godfrey, the floor is yours, and I can see your slides as well.
Just to check if you can also hear me well, Javier.
Yeah, very clearly. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Godfrey Takawarasha. I work for UN OCHA's Center for Humanitarian Data as a data manager for the Humanitarian Data Exchange. Today, I'll briefly highlight the work of the center and explain how HDX works. I'll also show you how to find IPC's data on HDX. The center is an important part of OCHA's information management work. We are focused on 4 areas. That's data services, data literacy, data responsibility, and predictive analytics. In this presentation, I'll focus only on our data services and won't have time to cover the other areas. But feel free to ask us about them during the Q&A and after the session. The center's data services work increases data interoperability through shared standards and integrated systems. We manage HDX, which is OCHA's open platform for data sharing, which just celebrated its 6th birthday this year. Let's take a closer look at the HDX platform. You can use HDX to find, share, and use humanitarian data all in one place. You can get the latest top-line figures of a crisis, create and explore interactive visualizations, get boundaries data, and raw data to prepare your own products. As a recent example of our team's work, I'd like to highlight this COVID-19 Map Explorer. About 1/3 of the global COVID-19 cases are coming from 63 countries with a refugee or humanitarian operation. To help understand the progress of the virus and its impact on already vulnerable people in these locations, this Map Explorer brings together dozens of datasets from over 20 sources, including the IPC data layer for affected countries. Here's the acute food security layer on the COVID-19 Map Explorer, showing the percentage of people in IPC phase 3 and above in Afghanistan. Here is how IPC data appears on HDX. It's organized into 24 country-level datasets and 1 global dataset. The data is automatically updated whenever new data becomes available on the IPC tool site. You can easily find IPC data on HDX by using the search bars or going directly to the IPC page. You can also find the IPC data on the data grids. Now, data grids show what critical data is available and missing so that all of us can be more focused with data sharing and outreach. Early next year, we'll be publishing a report called The State of Open Humanitarian Data based on insights from these grids. The grids are available on the pages of most countries with a humanitarian response plan, plus a few more. A data grid places the most important data into 6 groups: affected people, coordination and context, food security and nutrition, geography and infrastructure, health and education, and population and socioeconomy. The IPC data falls into the food security and nutrition category, as indicated by the red arrow here. That's all the time I have today. To wrap up, for those of you who aren't already using HDX, we hope you'll sign up and share data. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you have any questions on getting started or are unable to find what you're looking for. I'll hand over to Barbara now to continue with the program. I thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Good afternoon. I hope you can all see my presentation. Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Frattaruolo. I'm the Quality Assurance Team Leader for the IPC GSU based in Rome. As Sophie said, we are going in this session to dive a little bit more into the technical side of the IPC, talking about the IPC phases and the linkages to response. So allow me to retake one of Sophie's slide that was basically stating what is the IPC. So it's a common global scale to classify food insecurity and malnutrition. We will focus in this presentation on the three key topics that are mentioned on the definition. So it's a process for building evidence-based technical consensus, very important, these four words, evidence-based technical consensus among key stakeholders. And we do this by consolidating a wide range of evidence and by providing a path that, by a process that provides actionable knowledge for strategic decision makers. Basically, from a wide range of complex information, we conduct an analysis that allows to move to a simplicity, so to a more digestible information that can be exploited for response. I'd like to focus now on the evidence-based element. So how is complex data transformed into the IPC product? Basically, the IPC makes the best use of all the evidence that are available at country level, and it does it by a transparent, traceable, and rigorous process. It's very important to notice that the IPC does not collect data. There is not an IPC team going in the field and conducting surveys or conducting satellite imagery. The IPC team, the IPC technical working group at country level, regional level, and the GSU, we do exploit data that are already available and that are put on the table for the analysis by different actors and regarding different sectors. So the IPC includes standards for the evidence that are used. So we use all the evidence available, but not all evidence have the same time reliability, time relevance, or spatial relevance. So this evidence that we put together and use and analyze are also assessed based on how solid, how representative they are, or a given area or a given situation in time. And we inform the decision maker on the level of confidence, let's say, that we have on an analysis based on the quantity and quality of evidence used. And we inform whether the evidence level is acceptable, medium, or high. If it's not acceptable, obviously this is not an IPC analysis. The evidence are analyzed using internationally recognized cutoff, and these cutoff are the same for every country. So the evidence that we call outcomes that come from survey in the field, they are analyzed using some standard thresholds that are the same in all the countries and that represent a convention among different actors and the scientific community to say that actually when this indicator is at this level, this corresponds to a given situation. So all the evidence in different countries are analyzed using the same threshold, but we also proceed with a contextualization of the information. So we put together this standard way of estimating the severity through recognized and international cutoff, but we also put into the analysis the understanding of the context and how different information relates to the context and results in different consequences. Again, which data fits the IPC? So we said IPC does not collect data, but which data fits within the IPC? So IPC brings together information from different sectors, from randomized surveys, so it can be food security and nutrition monitoring system, emergency food assistance, food security assessment, emergency nutrition assessment, multi-sectoral need assessment, any time of that called a rapid assessment, smart surveys, a nutrition survey that happen in the field. But we also complement all this information with economic data, so prices, remittances, inflation, with climatic data such as rainfall, forecast, agriculture data, so harvest prospects, stock available at household level, stock available in the community or country level. And we receive these sources, survey or data from different sources. So it could be produced by national government, by national and international NGOs, from UN agencies, from technical agencies, so from different actors. And at the end of the day, what we assess is the reliability of the evidence. It's not important which is the agency that has collected them. To converge this evidence, we use a consensus building process that entails a critical review of the evidence using different tools that are part of the IPC protocols. Moving now from the concept of evidence-based to the concept of consensus-based. So why is consensus important in the IPC? It's important because it helps us obtaining inputs, it helps us obtaining data, bring it together different sectors and different actors. They usually come with their own data set that we can use to fit the analysis. It's also important because it strengthens the neutrality of the analysis, because it creates an open technical debate within technical experts that have different background, different belonging in terms of agencies, and they come together to produce a neutral analysis. But it's also important because when the same actors that conduct IPC analysis are also the ones that need to use the analysis to inform the response and to respond, there is a chain of trust in the process, because it's easier to exploit the IPC information when the agency who is going to exploit the information is also an agency that has participated in the process, because this builds trust into the information that we are using. How is consensus built within the IPC? The first step is to compose a multi-agency analysis team, which means putting together experts from different fields of expertise and different sectors and different agencies. And the second point is conducting the analysis following a process to build consensus. And how to build consensus, where the core point is being always based on evidence and not on individual opinions. We set up different stages of vetting of the data, vetting of the results, vetting of the driver. We set up different procedures to proceed towards consensus step by step. But also we create a space for dissenting views, for those who are not in full consensus. And we define consensus as the less worse option. So a moment in which all the partners are in agreement with the results. They're probably not 100% in agreement, but they are in an acceptable agreement, considering that they need to find, to mediate and to negotiate with other partners, and considering that there might be some contradictory evidence. So I would say we create a space for dissenting view, and we document transparently which actor and on which topic they are not agreeing with the overall technical working group. So we are very transparent. We do our best to have a fully consensual analysis, and when this is not reached, we are transparent on saying that for one or two partners, this and this area, the consensus were not full. Moving on, what are the main, so I explain you how we conduce the evidence analysis. Now, what are the main results of the IPC, the main products? So Sophie went through it already, so we tried to reply to the 6th question, where, when, etc., why. But the actual product that the agency are going to use are the IPC maps, which indicates the severity of the security. The IPC population table that indicate the magnitude, so how many people are in each phase and how many people are in IPC phase 3 and more, requiring an urgent action. But we also inform on the key drivers. So you will find not only a map and a table in our IPC product, you will find a quite extensive, quite comprehensive analysis of the situation in the current period, a list of assumptions on how the situation is going to evolve, and which are the expected drivers for a deterioration or an improvement, and finally some recommendations for action. We go through that. So the IPC phases definition, I think Sophie already went through it, but I'd like to retake them to link that to the priority for response. So you know that we have 5 IPC phases. Phase 1, known, minimal food insecurity. Phase 2, stress, it's a mild acute food insecurity. Phase 3, crisis, it's an acute, high acute food insecurity. And 4, critical acute food insecurity. And phase 5, that would be famine or catastrophe if does not reach the area level classification. So for each of these phases correspond a priority for response, an action that is needed. So for phase 1, the action are required to build resilience and for disaster risk reduction. For phase 2, that would be disaster risk reduction and protection of livelihood. For phase 3 and above, it's a urgent action required to protect livelihood, reduce food consumption, or going to phase 4, save livelihoods and lives. In phase 5, revert and prevent widespread death and total collapse of livelihood. As you see, IPC provide response objective and provide actionable knowledge for the response planning. What do we not provide is the modality of the responses. So IPC can say there are 3 million people that are in high acute food insecurity or critical acute food insecurity, and urgent action is required to save lives and livelihood. But we will not say that the action should be a cash transfer or general food distribution or any other specific modality to respond. Still, the IPC analysis is a lengthy and in-depth analysis of data. So in some countries, it's possible that there are some more elements that indicate that a modality would be more useful than another one. But basically, it's important to keep separated the IPC food security analysis from the response planning. And we can provide information for that, but we are not going into that in detail because that's a second process that needs to be done by providing market assessment and other typology of response analysis. How is IPC feeding into the humanitarian programming cycle? So there are three main documents that we support with IPC analysis results. The first one is by logic, the humanitarian needs overview. And within it, we usually exploit IPC analysis that are conducted in a projected period that covers the year for which the humanitarian needs assessment is produced. And in this case, the IPC is very useful because it produces, as a result, a severity map and a magnitude table, so a population table that help identifying the population in need. So it's very similar to what we had in other sectors as a severity ranking and PIN estimates within that is done by other clusters. So when it is referring to IPC food insecurity or IPC acute malnutrition, more and more when IPC is available is the IPC map and population table that is used to feed the HNO. But we also use the IPC for other moments within the humanitarian programming cycle, in particular the mid-year review, and in some cases the assistance humanitarian response plan. And in this case are the analyses that are conducted throughout the year, just before the middle-year review, that provide an update of the magnitude of food insecure, that including already the mitigating effects of humanitarian food assistance, and therefore they provide an assessment of a need for a top-up for addressing further need in terms of response to food insecurity. However, just a few considerations before I finish. When using the IPC to feed the humanitarian programming cycle, there are two elements that need to be taken into consideration very carefully. One is the validity period, and the other one are the comparison or trend analysis. Regarding the validity period, it is important to notice that each IPC analysis comes with a reference to a given period for which the analysis is valid. Being valid means that the conditions are likely to remain the same throughout this period. So anytime an IPC is used for an HRP, so for an HNO, it is very important that we use correct periods so that there is an agreement among different partners that actually what we want to use in the humanitarian needs assessment is the projected period or is the current figure. So it's very important to determine which validity period, which analysis you're going to use. And it's a consensus process, but it's also something that has to be logical. So if you want to inform the next year programming, you should use the projection that cover next year. So the IPC analysis period are determined, validity period are determined before the analysis, following different logic. It could be a seasonality logic, so one analysis will cover the lean season, and the following projection will cover the harvest season, etc. Or can be based on decision-making needs. So we have a lot of analysis during the months of August, September, October that are meant to fit the humanitarian needs overview, and by purpose, their projection falls into the next year so that they can estimate which will be the need in the next year. In the peak of the next year. And decision makers need, so if there is an update because of a certain meeting in which this information is required and IPC analyses are about to expire, and we know that we can organize an update, we can also try to do that at country level. The IPC analyses are fixed and valid during the validity period. However, they can be updated because especially the projection, they are created based on a given number of assumptions, but we cannot read the future. So some of the assumptions cannot remain valid because of a sudden shock or something that has happened in a different way from what was foreseen. And in this case, the technical working group gather again and can update the projection. The second element that needs to be taken into account is to do a careful use of comparability. So the IPC naturally, since it's based on standard protocol, makes all the analysis comparable across time. So the IPC results can be used to communicate to decision maker that the situation has deteriorated or has improved or is stable. Okay. However, this needs to be done with extreme, and it's good that this can be done. This is why we have a standard protocol, but we need to do this with an extreme caution, because it's very important to be transparent when we say deterioration or improvement, by also setting what is the season in which the analysis is conducted. What is the population cover, urban, IDP, or is the analysis including or not the assistance? Overall, the important thing is to be transparent about what we are saying. A quick example, but I'm not going into detail. Between 2018 and 2019 analysis in Afghanistan, the population in need has moved from 9 million to 10 million. We will naturally say that there is a deterioration, but actually the analysis in 2018 covers 71% of the country population. And the following year, it covered 95%, because the agencies organized in a way to expand the coverage of their survey. So the natural message is that food insecurity has deteriorated because there is one more people food insecure. But in reality, what has happened is that the severity decreased from 43% of the population food insecure. We moved to 33%. So this is just to say that we need to be careful when exploiting the information for comparison. And overall, the suggestion is to work trend analysis based on the severity and the prevalence rather than the magnitude. I'm over. I'm finished. Thank you very much. All questions are welcome in the Q&A session.
Barbara, that was very interesting. I really like the part of the validity period and the comparability that you touch on. I think that's super important. Let's see if there are any questions from our attendees. Frank, the floor is yours. Over to you. Frank, you need to mute yourself. Okay, now you're on mute. You only need to put the mode presenting for your slides, if that's possible. Yes.
Oh, thank you very much, Javier. Can you hear me very well?
Yes, very clear and sound. Over to you.
Thanks very much, and I welcome everyone who is part of this webinar, and we are very happy that we're out to explain what the IPC is and how we created the IPC. I will not dwell very much in the technical bits of the IPC. However, I will try to provide some light on how to produce IPC key products. And as you know very well, that the bedrock of IPC communications is the map. And if you have come across any IPC products, it's what a lot of people have seen. which is the IPC AFI map. And in this case, I'm going to be very specific. It is the acute food insecurity map. The acute food insecurity phase, which we are talking about mainly today, is different from acute malnutrition and acute chronic. And again, I want to stress that if you like to make a connection that the acute food insecurity phase is what was used to declare famine in South Sudan in 2017 and in Somalia in 2011, just to make it very clear. And what we would like to achieve today is how do we produce maps from acute food insecurity analysis? So what happens when a country, a technical working group has met in a country and come up with key figures? What you get is the population figures. And those population figures come in two sets. One, the current, which is the prevalent situation, and the likely situation in the coming months. Now, you might have all seen this, but I'd like to clarify or inform you that a population is classified in a certain level of severity or a phase when 20% of that population has been found to be in that phase. It's very important to note that when you see, for example, a certain state of a certain country colored orange, which is IPC 3, phase 3 and above, it does not mean that the 2 million people in that country or in that county or state are all classified in phase 3. It is 20% of that population. So what happens when we get these tables from the technical working group, which is one of the biggest products the technical working group spends a lot of time to come up with, the are always based on the latest assumed population level in the country, usually supplied by the Ministry of Statistics or Agriculture, depending on which country you're working in. So it's always pretty much updated or based on estimates that are updated. So what we do is you have the current and the projection, and it's very important not to confuse the two. My colleague Laura Bain will be going into how do you communicate the current and how do you communicate the projection. That will be dealt with in the next phase. Now, what we do is these population tables help you to classify the maps that you see on this slide. And as I said, again, the maps do not mean that whoever is in that state is classified in that level. And that also helps us to make sure that we achieve both uniformity, but everyone using these maps must understand that. So there has been a problem, and the problem has been that there have been no guidelines to inform these maps. For all the IMOs, all the GIS people, some of whom I know on this group, have had so much trouble trying to produce IPC maps with very little guidance. And what I'm presenting about today is new guidelines that will help you produce IPC maps. And what we'd like to achieve is one, to help you produce IPC maps without coming up with your own solutions. And on solutions, I mean, for instance, some of our colleagues have chosen to produce IPC maps using other colors. And they have switched IPC phases with other colors, and that has been a big problem. And what is the problem we have there? We don't have consistency if another country uses different colors, and we don't have comparability. And what these mapping guidelines would like to achieve is consistency and global and regional comparability. So we would like to appeal our colleagues in OCHA, especially who will produce these maps, and other organizations, to please stick to these guidelines that we have produced that give you all the color codes and the standards. We know you have your internal guidelines, but we would like to achieve some level of consistency in all the maps that we produce that project IPC classifications. So these guidelines that we have come up with will offer you a lot of, I'm trying to go next. I'm having so many problems here.
No, you're good, Frank. Maybe just click again.
We'll have map profiles, so it's very important to know the map source, the validity of the map is covering, whether it's a current map or a projection map. It's extremely important to have this as part of the map. the phase and color guide. Now, we have seen a lot of people reproducing IPC maps and using different colors, and we cannot blame them because the guidelines have not been very accessible, and some of the color codes in the IPC manual have not really been accessible to a lot of people. So these guidelines that are going to be circulated after this webinar will provide you all the key color codes as I'm going to dive into this session to show you which colors go for which phases as you design your maps. Key symbols, as you will see, since April 2019, when the IPC published its new technical manual, we introduced new symbols, and those are the humanitarian food assistance symbols on the maps. A lot of you may not know what those symbols stand for, but those symbols mean a lot in terms of response. They guide a lot of decisions in terms of response. And I'll delve into symbols, mainly the HFA or humanitarian food assistance maps. And then we have fonts and borders. This is something that we use internally for consistency, but I know a lot of you have got your own guidance. So fonts and borders are not things that you must stick to because you have your own. And then we have inserts and formats. Now, these are guidelines meant ostensibly for GIS professionals who are producing maps. In GIS, QGIS, ArcGIS, and others using EPS maps and things like that. These guidelines will help you choose the right colors. Now, I'd like to go into the main colors that that inform our classifications. As you have seen, we have phase 1, minimal, phase 2, stressed, phase 3, crisis, emergency, phase 4, and famine or catastrophe, phase 5. These guidelines provide you the color codes in CMYK, RGB, and WebHex to make sure that you have the right colors. We have tested them and they work very well, and these are the updated colors. So whoever will be producing IPC maps and whoever would like to use the IPC colors, we would really love that you stick to these colors so that we can easily compare maps from country to country, region to region, and so forth. Now, the IPC manual version 3 introduced a new classification. I am not very sure if all of you know this, but it will definitely come into play once we have this kind of classification in any of the countries. The new classification is called famine likely. This is when famine is likely occurring, and while available evidence indicates a famine, evidence is not adequate to confirm or deny the conditions. So this is where a lot of IPC analysts or TWGs that have had enough evidence that may indicate that a famine is taking place, but it's not conclusive. So this is when they will classify famine likely. It is the same color as catastrophe or famine, but with strokes, with white strokes across. When you see this, just know that famine could be taking place in that location, but the evidence is not conclusive. And I know there are so many ways of producing this in ArcGIS. It's very important that you know that this is one of the new classifications that we have come up with, and we would like to cause less confusion whenever people come across this classification. It's extremely important to understand that this is the way we're going. We have a constantly evolving team of technical experts that are coming up with new ways of communicating this, but we'll update these documents to make sure that you know that these are the new changes. Now, I will skip most of the symbols that you may know, but take you straight to the humanitarian food assistance symbols. Since early 2019, these symbols started showing up in IPC maps, and I'm very sure that a lot of people have, who are not technical enough to understand what they mean have really been confused. So I would like to introduce these symbols. One is the light gray symbol, and this light gray symbol is always put on a map where at least 25% of the households in that given location have 25 to 50% of the caloric needs. And that's the amount of food they have access to in terms of food assistance. And the second symbol, which is gun gray, a little bit darker than the light one, is when 25% of the households in that given location have more than 50%, meet more than 50% of their caloric needs. This is information that helps decision makers to know where to channel resources so that they can save lives. And when you see these symbols, make sure that you refer to the mapping guidelines to understand where they are. We will actually try to provide all the symbols you need for mapping in EPS and PNG format for you to download so that they are put in the right place and in the right manner. Now, I will only delve in those two. The mapping guidelines will be circulated right after by Karim and team, and whoever has got any questions, we are really happy to answer them. A lot of you will ask us questions, where do we get mapping resources? For example, where do we get the data? The IPC a few months ago launched the population tracking tool, which is the same tool that is embedded in the HDX humanitarian data website that allows you to download all population figures that you need. And those population figures will come in the classification the colors that have been assigned to those figures. So it's extremely important that you know that those will be easily available. What we cannot provide and will be provided very soon is mapping resources. The IPC is nearly completing a mapping tool, which will allow you to download GeoJSON for your mapping needs, as well as population spreadsheets and PNG maps for your communication needs. This is something we're working on, and if you subscribe to the IPC mailing list, you will be notified when these are published. But this is something that we are constantly working to improve. So this is something that is new, and I would like to encourage whoever is involved in one way or another in producing maps should at least follow the mapping guidelines. If you cannot, if you have your own internal mapping guidelines, at least follow the color guide. That is very important for us, and the biggest objective is to achieve global comparability and consistency. Now, I know that we don't have time. I'd like to stop there. These maps are never communicated on their own. They are always part of communication products. And for that reason, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Laura Bain, who will shed light on how to communicate IPC findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you everybody for being here. I think everyone can see the slides. Let me just put it into. So I'll be as brief as I possibly can so we can stay on time. But as my colleague Frank just explained, there is a need to ensure consistency when we're dealing with communications products, and also a need to ensure that there's consistent messaging. So that's the reason why the IPC has developed guidelines for communicating the acute food insecurity scale. This is stuck. So there are four training objectives for this presentation, which are how to communicate the acute food insecurity scale and the 5 phases of severity, call to action, so the key messages for each phase, understanding IPC specific terminology, and displaying your data. So just briefly, overall, technical writing is broadly defined as any form of communication about technical or specialized topics. Why is this freezing? Sorry about that. For the IPC, that means the writing style includes any type of text that aims to explain detailed food security and nutrition information. So an IPC technical writer communicates in a way that presents technical information so the reader can use the information for a specific purpose. So more often than not, people communicating IPC acute food insecurity information substitute the term food insecurity with hunger. So while the two concepts are quite different, it's clear that lay audiences better resonate with the term hunger. We understand the desire to interchange the two terms, but we don't encourage it, especially in information products that are meant for technical audiences. So let's just take a quick look at the difference between the two words. So hunger is an uncomfortable or painful physical sensation caused by insufficient consumption of dietary energy. It becomes chronic when the person does not consume a sufficient amount of calories on a regular basis to lead a normal, active, and healthy life. Versus food insecurity, a person is food insecure when they lack regular access to enough safe and nutritious food, for normal growth and development and an active and healthy life. This may be due to the unavailability of food and lack of resources to obtain food. Food insecurity can be experienced at different levels of severity. So that's when the acute food insecurity scale comes in. So it's defined as food insecurity found at a specific point in time and of a severity that threatens lives or livelihoods or both, regardless of the causes, context, or duration. The analytical focus is identifying areas with a large proportion of households with significant food energy gaps or livelihood changes that endanger lives or livelihoods. The strategic objective is to prevent or decrease acute food insecurity that threatens lives or livelihoods. And as we already heard, an area is classified in food insecurity phase when at least 20% of the population in the area is experiencing the conditions related to that phase or the higher phases. So just briefly again, the IPC acute food insecurity scale categorizes acute food insecurity into 5 phases of severity. Phase 1, no or minimal acute food insecurity. Phase 2, stressed. Phase 3, crisis. Phase 4, emergency. Phase 5, catastrophe or famine. And within phase 5 is famine likely. Each phase has important and distinct implications for where and how best to intervene. And of course, each has its own message when it comes to communication. So phase 1 indicates that there is no food insecurity, not a food insecurity situation. So there's really not a need to message this phase typically. So let's just begin with phase 2. We have broken it down into 2 columns, the messages and call to action for a technical audience, as well as the media and general public. And they are quite similar messages, but they are slightly different as well. So for IPC phase 2 stress, the key message for the technical audience is that households face low levels of acute food insecurity. They have borderline adequate access to food, but they cannot afford some essential non-food expenditures without resorting to unsustainable coping strategies. The call to action is that interventions are required for disaster risk reduction and to protect livelihoods so households can sustain themselves. So for this phase, the media and general public key message is that people face low levels of acute food insecurity. They're at a high risk of facing high levels of acute food insecurity. They're in a stress situation. People have erratic economic access to food, and they're vulnerable to shocks and disasters. Action is required to improve people's stability of access to food and to reduce their vulnerability to disasters and shocks. Moving on to phase 3, the key message for the technical audience is that households face crisis levels of acute food insecurity. Many or more children than usual are malnourished due to inadequate access to food. Households only have adequate access to food by resorting to harmful coping strategies or selling their assets. So the call to action here is that urgent action is required to protect livelihoods and increase access to food to avoid a food emergency. Versus the media general public key message is that people face crisis levels of acute food insecurity. They are in crisis, they're malnourished due to inadequate access to food. They only have enough food by selling off their assets or through other harmful coping strategies. Urgent action is needed to improve and increase people's access to food. And if nothing is done, people could face high levels of hunger. Phase 4, emergency, the key message for the technical audience is that households face critical levels of acute food insecurity. The situation with households being food deprived, and children under the age of 5 are severely malnourished. Households only have adequate access to food by resorting to emergency coping strategies and selling their assets. Urgent action is needed to save lives and livelihoods, and if nothing is done, the population could face starvation or death. The media general public key message here is that people face critical levels of acute food insecurity. They are in a situation of emergency. People are malnourished due to lack of food. They only have enough food by selling off their assets or through other emergency coping strategies. Urgent action is needed to save lives, and if nothing is done, people could face extreme hunger or death. And finally, IPC phase 5, which is the highest phase, catastrophe or famine. And of course, this phase has the strongest and most aggressive messaging when it comes to communications. So for the technical audience, households face catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. They're extremely food deprived, and children under the age of 5 are severely malnourished. Households still have inadequate access to food even after full employment of coping strategies. They're facing starvation and death. There's an urgent, immediate action is needed to stop widespread starvation and death and the total collapse of livelihoods. The key message for the media general public is quite similar. People face catastrophic levels of acute food insecurity. People are in a catastrophic situation. They're facing starvation and death. They're malnourished due to a lack of food, and they still do not have any means left to access food. Urgent action is needed to stop widespread starvation and death. And finally, for the famine likely category, the call to action for a technical audience is that urgent, immediate action is needed to stop the likelihood of widespread starvation and death and the total collapse of livelihoods, but that additional evidence should be collected to confirm the classification urgently. For the general public and media, urgent action is needed to stop likely widespread starvation and death, and again, more evidence should be collected to confirm the situation. So moving on to some IPC terminology to make things clear. There's been some back and forth on some terminology used within the IPC. So we will no longer be using the term severe or severely to describe phases 3 through 5. This is simply to avoid confusion with terminology used in FAO's State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World reports. So the IPC will be using the phrase high levels of acute food insecurity, IPC phase 3 or above, or high acute food insecurity, IPC phase 3 or above, when describing phases 3 through 5 collectively. The IPC will stick to the term acute or acutely to describe the individual phases of acute food insecurity, and those are qualified by mild for IPC phase 2, crisis for IPC phase 3, critical for IPC phase 4, and catastrophic for IPC phase 5. When you're formatting IPC phases, we suggest you write the name of the phase first, followed by the phase number in parentheses. For example, over 20,000 people in the district are classified as crisis, IPC phase 3. So as you can see, the phase name should always be written capitalizing the first letter since it is a formal title. Another thing that is sometimes confusing is the language to use during the current and projection periods. I'll just skip this slide because I think that Barbara as well as Frank have touched upon what the classification periods mean. So messaging the different time periods requires different tenses. So use the most appropriate tense for the time frame. The current period should be written in the present tense, what is currently happening. For example, more than 520,000 people are facing crisis levels of acute food insecurity and are classified in IPC phase 3. Versus the projection period, which should be written in the future tense, what is expected or likely to happen. For example, over 500,000 people are expected to face a food crisis by August 2020 if drought conditions persist. And just briefly on visual display, of course, the core of an IPC technical document is its text. The visual display should not be forgotten. So even the clearest instructions can be lost in a document that has poor visual representation. So we suggest thoughtful formatting, templates, maps, infographics, which will help break down complicated issues and make the information more dynamic and easier to follow. The visual should be obviously relevant to the text and should have an explanatory caption and be clearly referenced in the narrative of briefs. So of course, the IPC features two main products. The brief is the most common one and is for the technical audiences. The layout serves to answer the 6 key questions on the front page: how severe, how many, when, where, who, and why. So the audience can get a clear idea of the acute food insecurity situation simply just by looking at the front page, while the rest of the brief goes into much more detailed narratives, data, graphics, maps, for example. And all of these templates for the briefs are actually available in several languages to be downloaded on www.ipcinfo.org. And finally, the other main product is the IPC Snapshot. So it's a simplified version of the IPC brief developed for lay audiences and media, also very useful for high-level meetings because it's very easy and succinct to read. It's an infographic that provides a quick, well-organized explanation of a food security situation, highlighting key figures, the overview of the situation, the key drivers, high resolution maps, and other value-added graphics. So I did my best to stay on time. I hope I did. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. This is Karima. I'm the Center's Partnerships Manager. Just to be voicing the questions. So we've now received 17 questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as possible with the 15 minutes we have left. Let's start here now from Emily from UNESCO IIEP. She's asking where we are sharing the code to replicate the IPC calculation over other countries.
Karim, I can take that one maybe. So I think this, can you hear me?
That's very good.
Okay. I think this question came quite early in the presentation, and Barbara, I think, already addressed somehow in the presentation. The bottom line is that we don't come up with IPC findings based on a formula or a program code. It's a whole process where we have technical expertise around the table from various organizations. We use all the evidence available, and we have a process where we converge the evidence. So it's a human-led process, not a machine-led process. And stakeholders reach technical consensus most of the time based on this convergence of evidence. So no formula, no coding. This is really a human-led process based on technical expertise, because food security analysis is complex and requires a good understanding of technical aspects of food security and context as well, local context.
Thanks very much for that, Sophie. Our next question is from Jordan Davidoff at OCHA. Can you speak a bit more about the different scales the first speaker mentioned? When we say acute food insecurity, is it the same across the different scales, for example, in Bangladesh, Afghanistan, and Angola? Why are there different scales? And what is support to harmonize? Can't pronounce that.
No problem. I'll take that one as well. Okay, so basically, what we recognize is that so we have three scales: acute food insecurity, acute malnutrition, and chronic food insecurity. Each scale classifies a specific condition in the population that's analyzed, and this is linked to a response objective. So if you look at acute food insecurity, this is about measuring food insecurity at a specific point in time. Yeah, and we're talking about food insecurity that threatens lives and livelihoods and requires short-term urgent action, usually, yeah, at least for phase 3 and above. Chronic is food insecurity that persists over time due to structural causes, and that calls for longer-term action, medium to long-term interventions, typically development interventions. Acute malnutrition very much complements acute food insecurity. This is about the thinness of individuals, again, informs decision on short-term objectives. So how does this work in practice in the countries? Yes, each scale is comparable across countries because we use the same protocols, the same indicators, the same thresholds. So findings from an acute food insecurity analysis in Bangladesh are comparable to findings of acute food insecurity in Zimbabwe and in Central America. Okay, now different countries will experience different conditions. You may have countries that have major acute food insecurity issues. Let's take Southern Africa with regular crisis, drought, etc. But they typically don't have major issues with acute malnutrition. So in those countries, they'll want to use the acute food insecurity scale, but not the acute malnutrition scale. But they also have chronic issues, longer-term issues. So they'll also use the chronic food insecurity scale. Because we have many questions, I hope this clarifies.
Thank you very much. Our next question is from Sanjay, also at OCHA. He's asking if each shared as an API. I think that's an easy one. Javier or Jeffrey?
Thank you, Sanjay, for that question. And the answer is yes. Data on HDX is available from accessible on an API. And we have on the HDX website, if you go to humdata.org, documentation, you can find technical details on how to access the data through the API. Thank you.
Thank you, God.
Yeah, Karim, if I can add, Karim,
Go
if I
ahead,
can just
sorry.
add, the easiest way to get to the IPC data on XDX is just going to the platform and go to the search bar and just type IPC, and the IPC page on XDX will be prompted to you. The data is aggregated by country, and you will find the acute food insecurity estimates for each of the countries, and you find the three different estimates that Frank was talking about, the current one, but also the first projection and the second projection. So as Frank was making a big note, just pay attention to how to use that information. Over.
Thank you, Javier. Our next question is from John Kapoy-Kipterer from WHO. He is asking, on HDX, do you have plans to harmonize some health-related boundary data with WHO? Because for some countries, WHO receives reports on health boundaries, which are not necessarily following common admin units as they exist in countries.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So as you probably know, all the boundaries information are on XDX. The health catchment areas are sometimes different to the regular boundaries. We have a project to bring all of them into XDX, not necessarily to harmonize because they follow different purposes, but yes, to have them on XDX. So it's a project that is ongoing. We're working together with my colleagues of FIS within OCHA, but also with colleagues at WHO. So at the moment you can find some of them, but it's work in progress.
Thank you, Javier. And now we'll go to another question actually from, do we have regional and local scale level of maps and details?
Yeah, the IPC right now does not yet have regional and local level maps, but the mapping tool that will be launched in the coming months will have all regional and local level maps downloadable in three formats that I mentioned in my presentation. So that
Okay, thank you, Frank, for that. We have another question from Sajat Miko. And Sajat Miko asks, is IPC applying system dynamic modeling to support what-if analysis? Barbara,
Sorry,
take
can
that.
you
I don't know if your microphone is, yeah, go ahead, Barbara.
can you repeat the second part of the question? The first part is about modeling, right? And the second one?
That's right. So let me just pull this question back up. And please, is IPC applying system dynamic to support what-if analysis?
What if? Okay. Okay, I'll try to take this one. IPC does not use modeling per se. As Sophie said, is a human interaction, building consensus around the interpretation of a certain number of evidence using global standard and cutoff. There is some work, but is rather collaboration that we have with different initiatives to model certain aspects, to see how machine can help the non-human part of the IPC analysis to facilitate using technologies, a certain number of mechanics. And we do collaborate with the ongoing initiative on modeling, but we are not necessarily a modeling tool.
Christine Texier. So Justine's first question, we make IP mappers available in multiple formats, high resolution, vector formats, etc. Justine's second question is, how do we ensure compliance with UN recognized disputed boundaries? How do you ensure harmonization and compliance to UN references of nomenclature for second and third administrative level divisions?
Frank, you want to take that question?
Muted, yes, I was muted. Yes, the IPC will provide different formats. We'll get like from the module, JSON, Excel sheets, and P. Will be very. If you want to, if you also want to produce your own maps, we can. We shall also be able to share shape files with anyone who is involved in producing maps. Over to you.
And we have a question from Tinka Valentin from the Center for Humanitarian Data, OCHA. Two questions actually from her. So one, what data evidence is used to base the forecasts on? And two, is there an overview of the precise data used by country and the analysis done on that?
I can take this one if you allow me. So on the evidence used to forecast data, it's partly we use available evidence in the sense of weather forecast, rainfall forecast, price, expected trends. So actual evidence existing that inform on the future. And partly we base our analysis over assumptions that the analysts make over the most likely evolution of the scenario over time, factoring in elements on how we think availability of food will evolve, access to food will evolve, both economic, social access, and physical access, and how utilization and stability contribute to the overall system. So we use evidence on informing the future, and we use assumptions that are built upon consensus. And the second part was, are the data used, made transparent? So yes, if you look at the IPC brief, that sometimes is quite long, so not everybody gets to the last page, but in the last page you have the list of sources and data used, and you have elements also on the time validity and the methodology validity of the data used, and ultimately the evidence level, so the information based on how confident we can be on the analysis based on the quality and quantity of information used. It's usually written there, quite specified. The IPC do not own the data used in the analysis. They belong to the agency who collects the information. So we are not allowed to share the raw data or the data that we use in the analysis, but the technical working group is, and the agency collecting the data is. So if you really want to dig into the data, data sampling, or really technical information regarding data, you can easily reach out to the technical working group or to the agency that we mentioned, being the agency responsible for the data collection, to get more detailed information.
Thank you very much for that. Our next question is from Luca Vernacini from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Luca asks, how are the key drivers identified? Is there an analytical process to identify them, retrieving from the indicators used in the analysis, or is it an expert-based assessment or a combination of the two?
Okay, I can take this one too. So thank you, Luca. So the key drivers are coming directly from the data available. And the key drivers are usually shocks or things that are what really drives the food insecurity. For instance, in a given situation, a price increase by 2% cannot be a key driver. It's just an element of stability. But if prices increase by 25%, and it's in a season in which households particularly rely on market for food purchase, then that will be a driver that will cause a major shock. While in other contexts, an increase, the same probably increase in price during a harvest season might not touch so deeply on the household livelihood. So basically, what becomes a key driver? So everything is a determining factor, but what becomes a key driver in food insecurity is that element that is really causing the severity that we detected in the analysis.
Very much. We're trying to get through as many questions as we can with the of doing all of them. So if we question, we will respond by email. Let's go to what is the average range of the IPC data per how many years does it go back? And finally, she asks if the map symbols being used by IPC can be made available.
Yes, I think I stand to be corrected. I think our data goes back 3 years, and we are working on we are making efforts to make. That's something Godfrey can also regarding IPC mapping symbols. Yes, we are going to make them downloadable and widely available to everyone, along with the guidelines in EPS and PNG format for anyone to use. Over to you.
Thank you, Frank. And I just want to confirm that the data, the IPC data that is available on HDX is automated. So it's taken directly from the IPC tools website. And when you download the data from HDX, you'll be downloading the very latest data that's available on the IPC site.
Wonderful. I'm getting some reports here from various attendees that they're having trouble to confirm that we will all of these answers by email. I think we can close with one last question here from Mattia Pinzone. How is IPC data linked to the famine action mechanism from the World Bank?
I can take that one, Karim. So basically, the World Bank in the development of the FAM has involved a variety of stakeholders from the beginning, including the IPC team. And so there are basically two key aspects of the FAM. One in which we've been more involved than the other. There is the overall financing mechanism that's being developed, and I understand this is still being piloted, and this is related to triggers that can be based on IPC when it's available. Then there is the modeling part, which the World Bank worked very intensively in the last year and the year before, as you may know, Mattia. And so we were really deeply involved in the development of the model and consultations around that. Our understanding is that they've basically ended that part of the work, but made it available for continuation to any other agency that's interested. And we're basically looking at it within our work on using advanced technologies and artificial intelligence in support of the IPC. So the World Bank and people from the FAM team are actually involved in that working group and working with us on using possibly some parts or all of the parts of the model that they've been developing, seeing what can be done with this in the framework of the IPC and in support of the development of projections.
Very much for that, Sophie. And we've now reached the end of our time. So Javier, I'll give you the last word, please.
Thank you, and thank you all the panelists. This was super interesting. I think I've been receiving a lot of great feedback of the session, a lot of things to learn from here. We will be sharing some documents like the mapping guidelines that Frank was mentioning, the API documentation for you to extract all the data from HDX and other resources to your email. Also to invite you to continue joining us in this data deep dive series. We will have other great panelists for you to learn more about the data that you can find on HDX. So stay tuned with us. Soon you will get the invitation for the next webinars. And if you still have any other questions, just don't hesitate to reach out the XDX team at xdx.un.org. We'll be happy to support you. So thank you again to all the panelists and also all of you for coming, and have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very